Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Home Video Library. I'm your host Nathan B. Butler, author of A Saga on Home Video, the second edition of which can be found in Kindle paperback and luxury, whatever you want to call it, hardback right now over on Amazon in a 3-volume series. And this is Q&A number 11 for this series. I'll be answering questions that were posted underneath Q&A number 10 fairly recently in this episode. If you have any questions you want to see answered in a future Q&A episode, drop them into the comments here. Basically what I'll do is I grab the comments section from the previous Q&A to find questions for the current Q&A, and if you want any questions answered in a future one, you put them on the current one. I'll use them for the future. Bear in mind that typically these are one at a time, but sometimes they're in groups, in which case the batches can be identified by what I'm wearing. In this case, the Cobb Vanth shirt. Yes, it is Cobb Vanth, not Boba Fett on the shirt here. So this time we have just a few questions that were posted underneath episode 10 of this Q&A series, and I look forward to seeing what questions you might want to ask for the next one. Just drop them in the comments here. So we have, starting out here, a question from Eva H., who asks, with the announcement of Criterion making a deal with Disney starting with WALL-E, what do you think, if any, are the implications in terms of Star Wars home video, and could you see any Criterion Star Wars home video releases? Well, I don't really know a whole lot about the Criterion releases and sort of the deal with WALL-E, but I think in general, any new physical Star Wars home video releases would be good. Having something would be good, because what did we have so far in 2022? Basically those, right? Which, as I'm pointing here, these, I'm looking at the screen. There we go. That's really trippy trying to point at the right stuff looking at this screen. But those didn't even get a release in the United States. So what I would hope to see is, if it's going to be some kind of like little prestige format type thing, kind of like, Random Space Media doing the only 3D release of Spider-Man No Way Home in 3D in Australia or something. Even if it's like a little narrow niche kind of thing, I would love to see more physical releases. And if, by virtue of being the Criterion Collection, which in the past at least was kind of a solid standard, maybe that opens the door to seeing different or more bonus features, maybe some classic bonus features brought back, maybe even, and I can't imagine this happening, but maybe the original versions of the films perhaps being released, I'd be all for it. But really, it doesn't take a whole lot for me to want to see more physical releases of Star Wars stuff. At this point, it doesn't even matter what's on. These were just reissues in new packaging, but at least it's something for feeding that Star Wars home video collector's impulse out there. But it seems like on the US market that is fewer and further between when it comes to Disney. But having something kind of under another collection that might actually be putting out some stuff, even if it's kind of more towards the collector's market than a broader market, that is still something. I'm all for it. Go for it. Next question comes from Vintage VHS Treasures, who asks, do you think we'll ever see a release here in the US of the 4K trilogy sets that those other countries got? No, I did not mean for that to be immediately after I pointed to those over on the shelf. So honestly, I would say that it's kind of hard to say. My gut tells me no, that if we were going to get them, we would have gotten them. But there is always the possibility of staggered releases, though again, I doubt it, because usually the US is where it starts. But you think back to like 2019, we got the black bordered releases, which didn't match the ones elsewhere and became a whole issue. We've talked about that before. But we got our first black border releases on DVD and Blu-ray in 2019, whereas everybody else waited until 2020 when the black border 4K releases came and got theirs alongside it with the updated discs that we didn't have in our black border Blu-ray or DVD releases. That, I think, was an instance of us kind of jumping the gun in the US, or Walt Disney Studios Home Entertainment, not us. We could have waited and had better stuff. But you did see a release here followed elsewhere a year later, so there was some staggering. But typically, like I said, US is where that will start. So if we didn't get them yet, my guess is we won't. There's also, though, another possibility, if it's not going to be staggered, there is also the possibility that these will be reissued somewhere. And if they get reissued, then along with that reissue of these, maybe we'll get part of that reissue of them. But these in and of themselves are already reissues of discs that had been released previously, so I don't know how likely it is that we'll see a reissue of these, kind of a reissue of reissued discs and reissued packaging, lots of reissues as part of that sentence. So yeah, I'd love for us to. but I doubt it. I think it's going to be like those Zabby Steelbooks, right, from, what, 2020? We probably won't actually see our own version of those in the US. It's just a different kind of market in different places. The same reason why you can find 3D, for instance, still in Japan for a lot of the Disney stuff that's coming out right now for the Marvel stuff, but you won't find it in the UK or elsewhere. Formats tend to fade at different rates in different markets, although usually they're somewhat close together. They tend to fade, like, beta, you could still see releases for Star Wars beta stuff in 95 over here. Pretty much gone by around 86-ish, 87-ish. But, we can see the fading of 3D pretty rapidly recently, but I think we are finally reaching a point where it's not even a fading of formats in general, but a fading of physical media overall, and how willing a company is to put the money into that type of production and release rather than streaming, especially with a company like Disney, where streaming is their big focus right now. So if we didn't get them yet, I don't know that we're going to see them at all. And while I would hope that if they do a reissue, we'd be part of that reissue, I don't even know if we should expect a reissue at all, because this might be their last hurrah when it comes to physical releases of the Star Wars films, at least until, or unless, I would assume until, we see a new Star Wars film get released, and surely there will be physical media releases of those. I think we are much more likely to see physical releases outside of the US, though, continue even after the US kind of dwindles in that regard, but we shall see. So, do I hold out a whole lot of hope for those from the US? No, not really. Let's see. James Lawner asks, which formats have the most titles in your collection? E.g., how many titles on DVD, Blu-ray, VHS, or Laserdisc, etc.? Well, I have not counted them in recent memory. I am in the process of putting together that spreadsheet as time permits, but time has not permitted much lately. I would say, though, that probably the two formats, and you probably would have guessed this, probably the two formats that have the most releases for me, it's probably VHS and DVD. The reason I say DVD is because they did a lot of reissuing of DVDs. There were a lot of box sets with multiple DVDs in them. And even once you started to see like Blu-ray, DVDs typically were packaged within them for a while. So I imagine DVD is probably one of the most prominent in the collection, and then VHS. Close to that would probably be Blu-ray, depending on how many reissues we're talking about, depending on factoring in like multiple store exclusive copies of recent releases and stuff like that. It is definitely not PVD, Mini DVD, Video 2000, Video 8, CED, Laserdisc, UMD, Super 8, that kind of stuff. Definitely not any of those. So by process of elimination, really, it's going to be VHS or DVD, probably with Blu-ray trailing very close, possibly. And even then, it's tricky because I'm not just thinking in terms of releases from the US, I have to think about other regions. And I tend to have more Blu-ray and later from other regions, or VHS from other regions, than I have of DVD from other regions, just in terms of how and when I was collecting. So I think VHS probably edges DVD out just barely, but it's hard to say. I would have to go through and count, and that is not a short process. All right, then the last question comes from Jason Thomas, who asks, hi Nathan, greetings from the United Kingdom, Wales in fact. Okay, here's my question. With regard to a possible, however unlikely, 50th anniversary release of the original unaltered trilogy on Blu-ray and 4K, how much do you believe Lucasfilm's claim that the original negatives were physically altered to make the special editions, therefore rendering any new hope of a UHD home video release hopeless? I tend to feel like we don't really have a lot of reason to doubt that, only because it was what they were saying at the time. Like, I think if it was, a decade later and they're saying, I know, we know you want the original version, but they just don't exist, and they had never said that before, I think that would be different than what we see now. Because what we see now is they actually were saying that at the time, when maybe they didn't realize how much of a push there would later be to have the originals on other media. If they had really thought about it at the time, you would think they would have made an effort to preserve. That said, we've seen things like, the fan restorations and whatnot. That is not to say that there may not be some ability to give us something that basically is cleaned up of the originals, whether it is from scanning good film copies that surely they have copies of, even if it's not all the different elements and whatnot separated out, or just kind of what they did right with the 4K release, where they did new scans of certain elements and whatnot. I feel as though it's probably more likely that if they were to do something like that, they would have to recreate it, probably, or be some type of scan of an existing finished copy, and they just like digitally clean it up as best as they can. But I don't. I would say that if you were asking me like my certainty that they were telling the truth about it, given when they started talking about that, how long ago that was in relation to the making of the special edition, what they showed in the behind the scenes stuff for the special edition, I tend to lean towards believing them, probably 70% versus 30%. I'm not fully trusting of it, but I'm sorry, I keep watching the reflections in my glasses because of the time of day here. I'm not fully trusting of it because I think there is a way to do it, and to some degree that is an excuse to not try other methods, but I don't know that we have reason to necessarily disbelieve that it happened. But in the production process, there are so many different steps that they go through, intermediates and all that kind of stuff with physical film, that you would figure that somewhere there exists something they could potentially use to produce that sort of thing, even if some of it has to be recreated. So I don't know. I mean, like I said, I don't want to distrust, and I don't feel like there's a need to fully distrust, but this is one of those trust but verify kind of things, and there really isn't a way to verify it, at least not beyond just taking their word for it, which falls under trust more than verify, right? So hopefully we'll see something like that again. I mean, having that for the 50th anniversary of A New Hope in theaters would be awesome. That'd be 2027. That assumes physical media is still a dominant thing at all at that point, I would say. It depends on their willingness to do it, who is in charge of Lucasfilm at the time, and so on as well. But at the same time, they have been really, really bad, home video-wise, pretty pathetic, actually, at making use of any anniversaries in a very long time. So I would not necessarily hold out hope, although, you know, I would certainly love to see it. But where will we be from a physical media standpoint by 2027, given what we've seen over just like the last decade? And that is still, you know, it's late 2022 now. We're talking basically the better part of half a decade between now and when that would have to be released. And they'd have to start working on it earlier than that. In the process, while, you know, you also see the work on other Star Wars media stuff. So I don't know. I feel like this is the episode where pretty much everything is, I'd love to see more. I don't think we will. It is a pragmatic episode, even though it's not necessarily a hopeful episode, unfortunately. But, you know, keep hope. Keep hope. Just temper it with some realism, right? You know, home video collections, as I've said before, are built on hope. But it's got to be the kind of hope that is tempered by pragmatism. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up a lot of times for disappointment. Maybe hope for something, plan for nothing. Then what they do wind up releasing is a pleasant surprise. With that, we will wrap up this Q&A. If you have any questions for the next one, make sure to put them in the comments of this one. This is number 11. Those will be for number 12. Again, thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the home video viewers.